Well, a special greeting to you this morning. If you are here as a guest or visitor, my name is John Davies. I'm the pastor. This fall, we are beginning a brand new series in the book of Genesis. This has been a book that I have been wanting to preach for a long time, and I feel like the Lord is set it up for us to have this season through the fall to look at the first 11 chapters of Genesis together. To give you an idea of where we're going to go, we certainly begin with Genesis 1, which is a familiar passage for many of us who are here, and we're going to work our way through chapter 11, which is the Tower of Babel, and really the Lord coming and confusing the languages and spreading the nations out. And there's so many lessons that are woven into Genesis that we need to wrestle with in every period of history. Who is the Creator? Why are we here? What is this all about? Who is God? And as we approach the text today, I'm going to take really a perspective that maybe you haven't thought about before. I want to start by really getting us in the shoes of the original author and the original audience. And I can only do that by what has been revealed to us in God's Word, because what we believe about Genesis is that Moses is the author. And we can go back and look at Moses' life and the accounts of how God called Moses to be the one who delivered God's people, the nation of Israel, out of captivity. They've been enslaved for 400 years in the land of Egypt. And as God called the Israelites out, a lot of things were taking place. A lot of things culturally were happening with God's people and with Moses that normally we just don't ever think about. We kind of read the scriptures as a 21st century American, very Western mindset. We have a very scientific view of the world, and we ask lots of scientific questions. But what I want to present to you today is that Genesis 1 is really not a scientific writing as much as it is a theological writing. Really, what Moses is going to be really stressing is who the Creator is as we approach the text. And so let me give you some framework to help us get started. The year is probably somewhere around 1440 BC. 1440 BC is the dating of the Exodus that we believe. And so if you look at the different scholarly writings and everything else, 1440, Israel, God's people, have been in captivity, slavery for 400 years. Moses is really someone who God allowed to be raised in the Egyptian culture. He understood certainly all the training and all the schooling that an Egyptian would have had. And as he lives his life, he realizes that the Egyptians are being harsh to the Israelites. In fact, he witnesses them being cruel, and he in turn kills an Egyptian, flees to the wilderness, and spends many, many years, 40 years, out in the wilderness, hiding out. Until one day, there's a bush, and the bush is on fire. And as Moses approaches the bush, he realizes that this is a supernatural event. The bush is not being consumed, but it's continuing to burn. And as Moses approaches the bush, and the voice through the bush tells Moses, "Moses, you are to go to Pharaoh, to tell him to let my people come out and to worship me." Moses says, "Well, who are you? We have plenty of deities, so to speak, and this is something that we as a church don't really study a whole lot, but I want to set the stage for you. In ancient times, every culture was polytheistic. There's lots of gods for this and gods for that. You can look at the Enuma Elish, which is the ancient Babylonian creation account, and see all the list of gods that they had. You can go to Egypt and see all kinds of gods that they had. Go to the land of Canaan, and there's tons of gods and idols that they worshipped. And really what these all were demons. They were spiritual beings. And as the people would worship them, the demons would deceive and distort and twist and ultimately lead to destruction for any that they could lead captive, because the demons did not like the image of God in creation. And so they targeted us, mankind. And when the scriptures tell us that when Lucifer left heaven, when Satan left, 1/3 of all the heavenly host followed after him. And when we look at the scriptures and we see a particular word, the word in Hebrew is Elohim. Elohim really just means generically a spiritual entity or a God, not necessarily the God that we think of when we read the Bible, but just a God, a spiritual entity. And so as we look at the text today and we kind of see what Moses is doing, we're going to see that word Elohim show up over and over and over and over. But at the burning bush, Moses is revealed for the first time in history the name of the God of Israel, and his name is Yahweh, I am. Yahweh's name is introduced at the burning bush, but as Moses records the beginning of Genesis for us, he does not put Yahweh's name in this first account. And it must have led the people who were there, who were with Moses in the wilderness now at this point, to ask the question, well, who is this God who has called us out, and what does he want from us? And the two verses I want you to see here, really to set the stage, are Exodus chapter 7, verse 16. Here's what Exodus 7:16 says, and this is God speaking to Moses to direct him to the Pharaoh. You shall tell him that the Lord, and whenever you see this in English, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, that is the covenant name of God, Yahweh. That the Lord God, that Yahweh Elohim, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, let my people go, so that they may come serve me in the wilderness. Then fast forward to chapter 8, verse 1. This is what chapter 8, verse 1 says. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, again, let my people go, so that they may come and serve or worship me. We know for certain who the God is that's calling them out, but here at the beginning of Genesis, the record does not say Yahweh Elohim. And so probably as the people who are there, they've been leaving, they just witnessed the 10 plagues and the massive catastrophes that took place in the 10 plagues, and the God of Israel was really being matched against the Elohim, or the common gods, the demons who were receiving worship in Egypt. And they were asking the question, who is this Elohim who's now calling us out? And Moses gives us this record. And the big question that I would like for you to wrestle with as you look at the text today is, I believe, one that probably the ancient listeners were wrestling with. Who is this God? Who is this Elohim? And what does he want from me? Let's read Genesis chapter 1. And the first account of creation works its way all the way through chapter 2, verse 3. So let's read through this together. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the spirit of Elohim, God, was moving over the surface of the waters. And you're going to see this word God, Elohim, show up over and over and over. Not Yahweh Elohim, but just Elohim. And I believe there's a reason for this. Then Elohim said, God said, let there be light. And there was light. God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And again, Elohim called the light day. The darkness he called night. There was evening, there was morning, one day. Then Elohim, or God, said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And so God made an expanse that separated the waters which were below from the expanse, and the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening, there was morning, a second day. God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth. And he gathered the waters, and he called them seas. And God saw that it was good. And again, the wording here is Elohim, Elohim, Elohim. Then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth, bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and morning, a third day. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and for years. Let them be for lights in the expanse of heaven to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser light to govern the night. And he made the stars also. And God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give them light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. Then God said, let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures. Let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens. And God created the sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. There was evening, and there was morning, a fifth day. Then God said in verse 24, let the earth bring forth creatures after their kind, and cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And then there's an aside. You'd expect that perhaps day 6 would end here, but it doesn't. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Verse 27 says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Then God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree that has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you. And to the beasts of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth, which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a sixth day. Then in chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, we have a seventh day presented, a day of rest. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all of their hosts. By the seventh day, God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work which he had done. And then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. May God bless the reading of his word this morning. The opening chapter of Genesis is a chapter of great controversy. It's a chapter which many scholars look at and they wrestle with, both those who are believers as well as those who are just scholars of antiquity and writings from antiquity, and they wrestle with what really is going on with this particular chapter. There's many people who deny the origins of the universe that the scripture proclaims, that really the heavens and the earth were created by the God of Israel. Yet here we do see in the very next verse, and we're going to get to this next week, while Moses does not say the name of which specific Elohim it was who created, the very next verse in chapter 2, verse 4, the Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, is creator. So the question that I want to posit as we begin the study today is really one that I think Moses intentionally weaves in. Because again, 1/3 of the heavenly host followed after Satan. They set themselves up as deities, so to speak, pagan gods to be worshipped behind the various nations, the gods of Mesopotamia, the gods of Babylon, the gods of Egypt, and all the other gods, because every culture in the ancient Near East was polytheistic. There are many gods. There's a God for this and a God for that. And as a Western Christian, we don't think very often in the 21st mindset of the polytheistic world that Israel existed in. Yet here are Israelites now at Mount Sinai, and they are there before a God who is giving his law and revealing himself to Moses, and Moses records the opening act of Scripture by stating these 3 words, in the beginning. And what a profound start that is. In the beginning. Well, who has authority to speak of the beginning? It's either going to be someone who is a liar, who's trying to deceive you, who ultimately was not really there, but is trying to pull it off as if they were, or it actually is the one who was at the beginning. This is the question that we have to wrestle with, and many in the church have wrestled with, and even those outside the church have wrestled with. And theory after theory after theory has been proposed and put before really all of our studies, both in the church as well as out in the secular world, to try to explain, well, how did it all come about? And many of the theories that we do have in the church, they're good and they're excellent to study, but I wonder if maybe that's not what Moses was helping these people understand, because the theories that we develop answer the question how. Even in the church, we have lots of how theories, whether it's young earth creationism or day-age theory or the gap theory or time relative theory, which Einstein helped contribute, or the old earth theory, again, the progressive earth, or that God somehow developed a mature earth, or one that I certainly would not ascribe to, theistic evolution, that God designed and then through the processes of evolution somehow continued to work through his creative process. There are lots of theories that ask the question how, but I believe that what Moses wants us to wrestle with is who. Who created? Because the people who are receiving this are coming out of 400 years of captivity. 400 years of being exposed to pagan idolatry and worship, 400 years of having exposure to the various Egyptian gods, and Moses states very simply all throughout this first creation account, Elohim, 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 Elohim. And so the question that naturally would have been on the lips of the people were this: yes, there's a spiritual being. Yes, there is some spiritual power. And y'all, just so you know, we still have this today in the New Testament. Paul talks about principalities and powers, does he not? There are still demons who are very active, who desire worship. This is not something that we do not experience today, yet we don't understand it the way that these individuals did, because they lived in polytheistic cultures all around them. And so Moses is saying there is a spiritual entity who created. The generic word is Elohim. And so the people would have been asking, which one? Which Elohim? Who is this God? And what does he want from me? You see, the only one who can speak of the beginning is the one who is there, because verse 1 begins, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And for the ancient listeners in Hebrew, they were natural speakers of the ancient language in Hebrew. They would have realized that as Moses was delivering this, and I believe it is divinely inspired, and that Moses, without a shadow of a doubt, is the author, they would have understood a rhythmic pattern to the unfolding of the events throughout this first chapter. You see, there's a very clear pattern of sevens that emerges. It's masterfully written. It's poetic in nature, without any question. For the ancient listener, they would have realized, wow, this Genesis 1:1, this first sentence that's given here, which then becomes the first verse later as scribes give verses to it. There's 7 words in Hebrew. Verse 2, 14 words in Hebrew. Genesis 2, 1 through 3, there's 35 words, all divisions of 7. 7 of completion, 7 of perfection. But not just that, earth is mentioned 21 times. The heavens or the firmament is mentioned 21 times. Elohim or God is mentioned 35 times. To be certain, there is something extremely poetic taking place in what Moses is doing here. He's teasing something out, I believe, to make them ask the question, who is creator? Who is this Elohim? You see, even though there might be a poetic aspect to this first chapter, these words are an authoritative claim to creation. And it's fascinating that Moses does not tip the hat until chapter 2, verse 4, as to who this Elohim is. He simply refers to the Creator all this time as Elohim, 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 generic term for spiritual power or deity. And the people would have understood all of really the Elohim that existed in Egypt. There was plenty of them. Again, demons masquerading as God themselves, desiring power, desiring to twist and corrupt and destroy humanity, to get rid of the image of God in creation. But as Moses works his way through, he presents a very clear pattern, a very clear symmetry to the way that God creates. God brings really form to what is formless, because in verse 2 identifies that the earth was formless and void. The 2 Hebrew words there are tohu and bohu. That means there is no form and there is no filling. But what God does in day 1 through 3 is he brings form to that which was formless, and then he fills that which was empty. And then over and over and over, there's this pattern of symmetry and beautiful poetry almost that's being expressed in how Moses creates all of these events. And in day 1, God creates a period of light to break up the darkness that was there. And in doing so, he creates the potential for time to exist because it was perpetually dark, according to what this record shows us. The picture here is a watery abyss that was existent at the time of the beginning. We later get in Scripture the picture of ex nihilo, which was God creates from nothing, but that doesn't show up until really Colossians. Here in Genesis, this record is showing there's a watery abyss that is there. It's formless, it's void, and so God brings form to that which is formless. He creates periods of light and darkness on day one. There's a creation of space on day two by separating the waters and putting the sky between them. Day three, God creates a fertile earth, an environment suitable for life. Then day 4, 5, and 6, he brings plenty. In fact, the idea here is it's overflowing with abundance of life. In 4, 5, and 6, he then begins to fill these things. He places stars in the sky and lights in the sky, the sun and the moon, to begin governing. And so God establishes time. He creates seasons and windows of time where there's day and there's night. He then creates sea creatures and birds to fill the air and to fill the sea, as he formed the spaces there. And then on day 6, on the dry ground, on the dry land, God forms animals, but he doesn't stop with that. He then creates humanity. And with every step, Elohim is creating through his word. There is no doubt that creation is submitting now to the sovereign creator. And for the Israelites listening to Moses, the structure of the account would have been familiar as well in some of the content of the account. There's been lots of studies, and I love looking at these studies, and I'm going to give you a little bit of conjecture. I suspect that what's happening here might be different than what I grew up hearing, because in the last 100 years, there's been a number of hieroglyphs from Egypt that have all of a sudden been translated because of the Rosetta Stone, being able to understand what some of the hieroglyphs are actually saying. There were various cultic religious sites in Egypt that recorded their gods' activities in creation. And what's really interesting, and this is, you can go research this is fact. There is a strong parallel in the Egyptian gods and the various activities that Moses is recording here. And it's almost, I believe, as if he's saying, Elohim did this, Elohim did this, Elohim did this, but the question then is, which one? You see, because for those who were in Egypt and those who were Israelites coming out of Egypt for those 400 years, there would have been some familiar understanding or knowledge. They might have looked at Moses and said, Moses, we're familiar with some of those Egyptian gods, and it sounds like maybe you're describing them. In fact, the Egyptian god Nun, he was the Egyptian god of the watery abyss. And all of a sudden, he came to life in a flash of light when wind moved upon his surface. Beyond that, we know about how Nun, this Egyptian god, gave birth to Ta, and when Ta spoke, Atum, who is the creator of the physical cosmos, came into existence with a display of supernatural light in the midst of the waters and an expanse of air within the cosmic ocean. And Atum then created lesser gods who then occupied the space between the sea and the firmament. Those lesser gods were dry air and moist air. Those lesser gods then created other gods. It's kind of this domino effect in Egyptian theology. And those lesser gods became the dry earth and the firmament of the sky above. But not only that, a god that was found in Elephantine, which is, again, an ancient cultic site in Egypt, as they discovered and read about this particular god's function, this particular god, Khnum, was a god who made man shaped out of clay and breathed life into his nostrils. And at the end of creation, Ta rests in satisfaction of what he's made. Now you might ask yourself, well, John, how does this work then? See, I believe what Moses is doing in Genesis 1 is he's raising the question, which God? Which God? Which God? You see, because for Egyptian theology, all of the other gods that they worshipped were a created aspect within the cosmos. The sky, the ground, the air itself, all of these things created objects. And what Moses is revealing is that in Genesis chapter 1, when the Elohim speaks, creation submits to his command. There is one Elohim that when he speaks, all other things lay down. When he speaks, all other things submit. When he speaks, true authority is on display. And when he speaks, his sovereign will is accomplished. It's simply by the authority of his word that this Elohim creates. And so the original question again is, well, John, which God? Or Moses, which God? What does he want with us? You see, I believe this is the question for Genesis 1. And really, I think this is one of the biggest questions in all of life for us, no matter what generation we live in. Who is God? And what does he want with us? Because if we're going to define life and what the purpose is of life and why we are really here and answer all of those really big questions that every generation humanity has asked, if we're going to understand who we are, we must first understand who he is. Because our definition, our quality, our purpose is not revealed until we understand who the Creator actually is. The true purpose of life comes with discovering who the one is who created it. Because the one who created life is the one who gives it definition. The one who commands creation is the one who determines what's acceptable and good and what's wrong and forbidden. The one who was able to create and sustain life in the midst of chaos and void is the God who created you. And he created you to worship him and to serve him and to enter into relationship with him. You see, while there are so many overlapping aspects to the creation narrative that we find here in this first chapter, to the polytheistic culture that was around them, there was something that was very distinct. All of the other gods, all of the other Elohim throughout all the other cultures, all the demons that existed that wanted worship and glory for themselves, they were leading humanity unto certain destruction and peril and twisting what the purpose of life was and saying, we want you to be ruined because we do not want the image of God on you to be on display. Yet here is a God that Moses identifies as the true creator. And in a double pinnacle, in a double peak, he creates two high points in the creation. The first high point is that we are made in the image of God. God created them, and he said, let us make God, or let us make man in our image, male and female. He created them. That sixth day is immaculate. It's something that's amazing. It's something that is sacred. Naturally, all of this is sacred, but there is a pinnacle here in creation where God puts his signature on it. And he says, I'm going to give something in creation my image and my likeness. This is something that is set apart for me. This is something that is holy, that is an aspect of being in relationship with me, that I might have communion with my image here. And there's lots of studies that have wrestled with, well, what does it mean, the image of God? And there's lots of definitions that are out there, but let me propose this to you, that the image of God is nothing short of a symbol of his rulership, of his kingship. Because all throughout the ancient world, we find rulers like Nebuchadnezzar and others having their images placed everywhere they could possibly do it to show their glory, to show their power and their might and their quality. And God says, I want people to understand, I want creation to be filled with my reflection so that the world might see who the Creator is. One pastor who mentored me up in Dallas described it this way. He said, humanity is almost like small mirrors, that we are meant to reflect the glory of the one who created us. And as God gives humanity the command that he does, he says, I want you to multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. All of creation is going to be under your dominion. You will be vice regents. You are to take my authority. You are to take the symbol of my kingship, my lordship, and I am establishing you to be authority within this place that I have made for you to live. And as you go, I want you to multiply so every corner of the world is filled with the reflection of my glory. Every corner of the earth has the image of God being presented. The God who is uncreated chooses us, humanity, as the first peak of creation to share his image with mankind, both male and female, a symbol of rulership, kingship, and a reflection of the Creator's glory. And because of that, we understand that all life is valuable. Human life is sacred. because God shared his image with us. And so whether you are young or whether you are old, whether you are a preborn infant or someone who is at death's door, is someone who is ailing in their health, or whether you are mentally challenged or whether you are sharp and you're on the top of your game, your life has intrinsic value because God gave you his image. From conception through natural death, the image of God is valuable. And so God blesses them, and he says, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And so we see something very distinct from all of the other creation accounts, that God gives us the propensity and the capacity for relationship, and that there is a call for us to both procreate and exercise dominion over the created order. This image is given to humanity, and there is a false teaching that exists, and it's actually spreading to the church today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to highlight it because I've seen it repeat over and over in the last few years. There's a teaching in the church right now that the image of God that's mentioned here in Genesis 1, the Imago Dei, is somehow connected or expressed through your race. We live in a period of time where racism and victimization and all these other things, social justice movements, are all trying to figure out who's the greatest victim. And naturally, you throw the race card out there, and don't step on my Imago Dei is the expressions that are being used. The Imago Dei has nothing to do with your race. The Imago Dei was given in Genesis chapter 1 and expressed again in Genesis 2. And the Imago Dei is preceding the separation of the nations, where race really does become a big part of the picture in Genesis 11. The Imago Dei precedes it by 10-plus chapters. Let's not get this confused, church. You see, God gave his image to mankind, male and female. And because of that, church, the scriptures teach us things that ultimately social media would shut us down for. The truth proposition that no race has more value than another. The truth proposition that there is no more value in male than female. The truth proposition that no position is going to give you greater value than someone else, because in the ancient world, certainly there was a teaching in foreign cultures, like in Egypt, where the Pharaoh was the Imago Dei, but everybody else had to serve him. And here in Genesis, Moses says, no. God gave his image to humanity. From the lowest of servants to the highest of rulers. There's intrinsic value, there is merit, there is worth, because you've been given the image of God. You see, we live in a culture, we don't talk about polytheism very much, the existence of many gods, but there are a lot of gods that are out there that desire us to worship them. There are things that are happening now. If you do actually study what's being done in Egypt, they've uncovered a number of the highway of the gods just in the last 2 years, where there is a highway of the gods for all of the Egyptian gods that were being worshipped, and many of them that we mentioned earlier are there, and there's monuments to them, and there's temples for them, and they desire worshiping. Y'all, it's demons. It's demons trying to play the role. The children of Israel would say, which Elohim? We know about all of them. Which one? Which one? Which one? And what does this God want from us? You see, we have lots of gods that vie for our attention, and we have gods that we create ourselves in our own culture, but there are certainly demonic influences that are out there still. They have not gone away. They've in large part hidden themselves, but they've not gone away. But we serve gods today. How many of us serve the God of work? The God of work, and we think, well, if I would just work hard enough, if I would just do this and I just do this, somehow I can find satisfaction. Or if I just pour myself into my children, and I just say, I'm just going to pour myself into my kids over and over and over, that somehow life will finally be satisfied. Or maybe it's all about, me doing something with my house or my possessions or my social standing and whatever I have compared to everyone else, that if somehow I just measure up enough that I will finally be completely at rest. But see, there's a second pinnacle in this creation account. And the second pinnacle in the creation account is not just the image of God that was created, but also the aspect of the seventh day rest. And that is the goal of creation. See, while humanity was the pinnacle of creation, that was not the goal. The goal of creation was the rest. And God has an evening, a morning, and a seventh day. And he looks at what he's created and he's pleased with it. And he takes joy in his creation. In Jesus' day, the Pharisees were persecuting Jesus because of Jesus working on the Sabbath. If Sabbath was truly for a day of rest and not doing a work, then Jesus, how come you're healing? How come you're doing miracles? How come you're making lame men walk and blind men see? How can you do this? How can you violate Sabbath? From Genesis 1, Genesis really 2, verses 1 through 3, it's been taught. How can you do this? And Jesus responded in John chapter 5, verse 17. John chapter 5, verse 17, he said to them, my Father, he's been working. My Father's been working until now. In fact, I myself am also working. At that point, the Pharisees realized that Jesus was equating himself with God. You see, if God were to truly stop work, all of creation would unravel. Because creation is held and sustained and maintained by the Creator. It is He who provides what we need to continue life. You see, it's not as if God somehow just hung it up and said, now I'm on vacation, I'm going to go create a private beach for myself somewhere and enjoy my retirement. No, God is intricately involved with His creation. He wants you to know Him. He wants to draw you into relationship. It is something that is so unique from the God of Israel, Yahweh Elohim, to every other God that exists. You see, you can serve your country and your family. You can serve your work. You can serve the earth. You can serve the latest group of victims that might be in social media. But you're never going to find a disease for your restlessness until you find your true rest in God. You see, God is the one who has designed you and put you here. Who is this God and what does He want from me? Who is this God and what does He want from me? The fundamental purpose of your humanity is not found in your consumption or activism or work. Augustine said this, who is a great church father. He said, we are restless until we find our perfect rest in God. And that's what the Sabbath is. It's the goal of creation, to find that perfect rest. Humanity was meant to not find its rest in creation. Humanity was meant to find its rest in God. The purpose of your life is not to work. Work is good and work is a blessing, but it's not designed to bring you ultimate fulfillment or meaning. The purpose of your life is not your family or your children. Family is good and children are a blessing, but that is not what you were designed for, and that's not what's going to bring you ultimate fulfillment or blessing. The purpose of your life is not adventure or pleasure. Those things are good, but that is not what's designed to bring you ultimate fulfillment or meaning. You see, the only thing that will bring you that perfect rest is finding rest in the God who designs you. Today we're observing communion. And when we speak of creation and God who spoke and created the world, there in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. You see, Jesus, who took on flesh and was with His disciples in the upper room, He was the one who was the agent of creation. Colossians 1 tells us, for through Him all things were made that were made. Nothing was made apart from Him. And so when we come today to the table, we actually come to a table with the Creator. We come to a table where we ask the question, well, which Elohim and what does He want from me? The answer is, it is Jesus, the New Testament name for the God who has revealed Himself through the Scriptures. Jesus is the one who has drawn you in, and He desires for you to know Him, and He wants you to find your rest in Him. See, in Matthew chapter 11, I'm not sure if you ever had these verses hit you this way, but in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, He says this, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I will give you Sabbath. You see, there are many here who are here today, and we've been chasing the wrong things. We've been spinning our wheels and looking for rest and satisfaction in all those areas. And many of them are blessings, many of them are good, but they always leave us longing for more. Jesus said, take my yoke upon you, learn from me, for I am gentle, I am humble in heart, and you will find Sabbath for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.